Hi, Asha. Okay, so we were. I really want to try and do two things this evening. Just one is try and understand the view of the Chachomim, the Tanakama, who argues on Rabbizobin today, and secondly, dip our toes into Tosus. So Rabbizobin today said that you're allowed to lift up the Paga, the unripe fruit, or the chaburah, the cake, even though that will involve moving the teven or the gacheles, because he holds that Titul and HaTsad lo shmei Titul. That's clear. And we saw the machlokas, maybe the view of the Meiri, either yes or not, depending on whether you agree with me or not. We saw the machlokas where the Titul and HaTsad was in that scenario. Now, what's the reason for the Tanakama who holds that you're not allowed to do so in Rabbizobin Tadoi's scenario? That's question number one. And question number two is, what's the reason for the Tanakama who does allow when it's Megula Muktza? So Rashi says that Megula Muktza, when it's Megula Muktza, there's no Titul min HaTsad because it's even less than Titul min HaTsad, which I understood to mean, wrong, you're right, yeah, I don't know. I understood to mean that Rashi understands that Megula Muktza means the whole top is uncovered, and therefore when you lift it out, you're not lifting up any teven or gacheles. And the only movement of teven or gacheles that occurs is that once you lift it out, it falls back in, or maybe it gets nudged a little bit as you lift it out. But that's even less than Titul min HaTsad. You're not lifting anything up through the movement, and therefore the Tanakama allows it. And the reason Tanakama doesn't allow it when it's not Megula is because he holds that Titul min HaTsad shmei Titul. That's how Rashi learns the sugya. And the advantage of this reading is that it fits very well the continuation of the Gemara, which says, since Rav Nachman paskins like Rabbizobin Tadoi, you see that he holds Titul min HaTsad lo shmei Titul. The simplest reading of that is that were Rav Nachman to paskin like the Tanakama, he would hold Titul min HaTsad shmei Titul. So that's Rashi reading the sugya. The Tanakama and Rabbizobin Tadoi are arguing over whether Titul min HaTsad shmei Titul or lo shmei Titul. The Ritva and the Miyuchas Laran, I think I also printed the Chedush Aran Miyuchasim. That means the Rishon that was ascribed to the Ran, as far as we can tell incorrectly, the Rishon that was known through the generations of the Ran, who started to belong to that base of Medrash of the Ritva and the Ran. So maybe it was a Talmud or another Rishon, someone in that base of Medrash that was mislabeled the Ran. The Ritva and the Miyuchas, the ascribed to the Ran, say a different pshat, and there's two really parts to their Chedush. First of all, they have to explain why Megula Muktza is allowed. And secondly, they have to explain why, if it's not Megula Muktza, it's not allowed. And the reason they say why Megula Muktza is allowed is because the Tanakama also holds that Titul min HaTsad shmei Titul. So that's one half of what they say. And the Titul min HaTsad lo shmei Titul, I'm sorry, yeah. And they therefore have to explain that when the Gemara seems to link the psak of Rav Nachman to paskining like Rabbizobin Tadoi to lo shmei Titul, that's lav dafka. Really, Rav Nachman holds, whoever Rav Nachman would have paskined like he would have said lo shmei Titul. All we see is that since it's true, it's accurate to say that since Rav Nachman paskins over Rabbizobin Tadoi, he must hold lo shmei Titul. The truth is, even if he was paskin like Tanakama, he would have held lo shmei Titul, and he would have had to go out of the price, either change the Geser or not hold the price at all, if you want to say shmei Titul. So that's Chiddush number one in the Ritva. And the second Chiddush in the Ritva, the second part of the Ritva is, so what is the issue if it's not Megula Muktza? And the Ritva says, because somehow it's bottled that the Paga and the chaburah are bottled to the Kash and the Teven and the Cholim. So that's the view of the Ritva, that the Tanakama also holds Titul min HaTsad lo shmei Titul. And the reason is because if it's completely immersed, it's somehow bottled, and some of that creates an issa. So I don't completely understand this Ritva, but let's just take it piece by piece. The first half of what he says is that there is a Titul min HaTsad over here. In other words, he's picturing that the teven and the kash gets lifted up by lifting up the fruit or the cake. You do lift up the teven and the kash, and therefore the only reason for the heter is because Titul min HaTsad lo shmei Titul. Now, how do you lift up the teven or the kash by lifting up the fruit or the cake? Either because the Ritva is picturing a slightly different scenario. he's picturing that there is Megula Miksosa means there is some of the Teven and the Kash sitting on top of it, or because he thinks even in Rashi that that's the scenario, and the reason he thinks in Rashi that it's less than Titul min HaTsad is because he thinks it's simply a neo. I'm not lifting it up. It's getting sort of thrown off through me elevating it, and that's called, according to Rashi, less than Titul min HaTsad. And the Ritva thinks that this is enough to cross the threshold of Titul min HaTsad. So either he's consciously picturing a slightly different scenario to Rashi, or he's picturing the same scenario and he's arguing the Lomdus, and he's arguing that this is called Titul min HaTsad. But either way, that's how the Ritva and the Run learn that, and many other Rishonim also. Reb Aaron, the Run quotes Reb Aaron, who is Reb Aaron Luniel, and from Provence, it's a provincial community. And others, that's how they learn. That's how they learn it. Now, what does bittul mean? That's the first half of the Ritva. The second half of the Ritva, where does the concept of bittul come in here? It's very difficult to understand. The bittul we're talking about over here, by the way, first of all, doesn't mean bittul b'roiv or anything like that. Normally, hilchos bittul is where something is indistinguishable or in a mixture of some sort or other. So you can have a bittul of dry pieces, what we call yovish b'yovish, where they're indistinguishable, and in that sense it's bittul. So you have 10 pieces, of which one is forbidden meat and the other 9 are mutter meat. But since they're indistinguishable, in that sense, they're in a mixture, or where it's literally a mixture, what we call lach b'lach, liquid with liquid, where it's just like a drop of milk that fell into a chicken soup or the like. Over here, neither occurs. I mean, the Paga and the chaburah are perfectly distinguishable. You can pull them out and you'll have a piece of cake or loaf or fruit. But he seems to be saying it's bottle because somehow if I've immersed it, I've somehow made it subservient and inferior and insignificant to the Teven, and therefore I can't move it. Now let's try and unpick what we mean by that insignificance. So if he means by that the whole unit is defined as being Teven or Gechorim, I don't think that's correct. I don't think we can learn it like that, because this leads us into Tosas that we will address in a little later. Both Tosas Diva Maskil Paga and Tosas Diva Maskil Hai Pugla. But let's start with Tosas Diva Maskil Paga, who addresses whether the non-Muktza becomes a bossis for the Muktza. Now, the concept of bossis is that sort of bittul, that effectively I'm defining the non-Muktza item as there to serve the Muktza item that's sitting on top of it. Right. So the concept of bossis is if I deliberately place my money on top of a book, because I wanted to leave it there. What I'm saying is that the book is a book that I don't wish to access on Shabbos, and I'm happy for the book to be subservient, to be a tray for the money. So that's the concept of bosses. So if the Ritva and the Ran mean that when it's fully immersed, it's sort of I'm redefining the chaburah and the Paga as simply being part of a whole unit that that doesn't have its own identity, because I'm planning to leave it there, and I'm evidencing that I just want it to be left there for now and immersed in it and so on. It's a little bit difficult to understand if I'm planning to take it out. So what exactly is this bittul that he's saying? Is it some new form of bittul, like a super bossis? Bossis will resolve over here because there's an answer to bossis somehow. Like Tosa says, because I wasn't planning to leave it there, or like the other Rishonim say that it's the opposite of bossis. We'll come to that in a minute. But if it's completely immersed, then somehow it is nullified and insignificant, and there just as a means to it. I don't quite see that in the language of the Ritva and the Run. So the best attempt I have at this is that he's saying a svara in Titul min HaTsad. The lomdus of Titul min HaTsad is that my action is ascribed to the mutter item, and the Muktza item is almost coincidental. I'm not engaging. The whole lomdus of Muktza is that I'm engaging with a Muktza item. With Titul min HaTsad, I'm not engaging with a Muktza item. I'm engaging with a non-Muktza item, and the Muktza item happens to be carried with. We saw that the Rishonim on Daf Mem Beis, when we learned it, said that the lomdus of Titul min HaTsad, at least the Halacha, doesn't make sense if I'm moving a non-Muktza item, but my intention is to move the Muktza item. Right? It only makes sense in a case like ours, where I want the fruit and or the radish, and the Muktza just gets carried along with it. If my intention is because I want to move the Muktza, like with the case of the mace, even though I'm not directly touching the Muktza, I'm just touching it through something else, that doesn't give the heter of Titul and HaTsad. Titul and HaTsad is a non-engagement. So maybe where it's mechusa, where it's covered and it's not megula at all, I can't argue that I'm not engaging with the Muktza, even though physically I'm only engaging with the non-Muktza because I'm let's say using the karka, I'm using the toothpick to get to the fruit and just lifting out the fruit and the gecholim or the teven falls off by itself. Nonetheless, since it's mechusa, I can't argue that I'm not engaging with it because it's too integral to the structure of how it's all positioned to not engage with the gecholim. I have to sweep off the gecholim or the teven to get access to it. So maybe that's what he means by bittul as a svara, not in Hilchas Muktza, but in Hilchas Titul min HaTsad. It seems to me that's the. I don't have a right, by the way. Either way, I don't understand. They don't elaborate on what the svara of bittul is. I don't know what pshat is. So the real truth is I don't know what it means. But it seems to me if we're faced with an option of a new, wild, radical, big chiddush in Hilchas Muktza, or a nuance in a sugya that's talking about Titul min HaTsad and how the heter of Titul min HaTsad works, it seems to me that's the better reading in the Rishonim. But I don't really know. Over to you, Rabbi Zobin, if you have any theories. I don't understand. No, I don't understand how Ikon Sof will make sense over here because what makes one, what makes it more Ikon just because it got covered. So that's what I'm saying. I don't know what lomdas of bittul make sense of it. If we're talking about a mixture, we're not talking about a mixture. It's indistinguishable. If we're talking about chashivos, how does it become less choshev because it's covered? If we're talking about some sort of super bosses, I don't really see the Rishonim saying that's far, and I don't really understand the super bosses far. If we're talking about Titul min HaTsad, I can live with it. We're learning a sugya of Titul min HaTsad, and therefore maybe the Rishonim are saying a nuance in Hilchos Titul min HaTsad that I can't argue that I'm not engaging with it when it's immersed in it. Titul min HaTsad is when there's a bit on top of it, or a bit on the side, or a bit's being moved. When it's immersed in it, you can't argue that I'm not engaging with it. You can't argue Titul min HaTsad. That seems to me.
And the Ritva needs this argument against Rashi. Unless he has that argument, he cannot say that the svara of Rabbi Nachman is the same, whether he's Eliezer ben Tadai or Rabbi Nachman.
Correct, yes. So he needs both arts. Now, I just want to point out in the Lashon of the Rishonim, it doesn't entirely sound like what I'm saying, right? It's not the greatest reason in the Rishonim. Let's look at the Ram just because it's shorter. He says, so he says they are bottled. It is bottled to the teven and gecholim, which are also betiltel. The which are also betiltel is going on the teven and the gecholim, and it seems to say they are bottled to the thing. In the lashon of the Ritva, he said, Mistoma, both of them are talking about where it's Mekulam Ksasa. Mishum Tasfirele, the Kivin to Ina Niraklal, Nasa Levatolo, but Geholim Shemasos Batolto. So they do seem to say they're talking about the object as opposed to my action, but I don't know I don't know. So in the language, they seem to be talking about the object. In Sfora, I don't really know what that bittul that they're talking about is. If the bittul they're talking about is in terms of my relationship to the object, I hear better the Sfora, but I'm not sure that's a good reading of what they say. So,
if you intended to take out the item on Shabbos, then you would have left some exposed in order to remove it. And if you didn't do that, then it shows that you weren't serious about it. Therefore, it's fun.
Yeah, that would be a very, very nice svara. And my first thought was exactly in that direction. That if I'm immersing it, it shows that it's meant to be there. The problem is that Tosfos of Masechet Paga asks the question, why isn't it a bossis? And he says explicitly, because the concept of bossis, it isn't. You have no intentionality to leave it there. Both the Ran and the Ritva, in a moment we'll go on and read what they say, also ask this question why it's not bossis, and they give a different answer to the question. They say that it can't be bossis because the concept of bossis is that the base is there for the thing sitting on top of it. Here, they're subservient to it. So bossis doesn't seem to make sense. So and Tosfos says explicitly that they're planning to move it. I don't know. I don't know how to read these. What to make of these Rishonim. Any Rabbi Zobin? No. Okay, so we'll leave it as it is. The language seems to say the object is bottle. I don't understand that svara. If what they mean to say is that my relationship to the object is altered, then I can hear it's an easier svara to cut. Yes, with pleasure, of course.
In the last year, when discussing the difference between the Iri and the Rambam,
Yes.
so maybe this plays quite nicely into the Halacha around sweeping once.
Yes.
So we were just looking at that, the Halacha on Titul Masechet Shabbat with iron nuts.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
You do Titul Masechet with them, you sweep them with some other implement on Thursday, and you chuck them into the bin.
Yes.
So in a sense, the reason why you can do that is because this pile of nutshells is hiding a place on your table, which you need.
Yes.
So you can directly push the things out and reveal the place that you need on the table. So you're directly moving the Muktza because you want to move the Muktza.
Yes.
In order to reveal this place
Yes.
on the table. So last, I think you wanted to suggest that would work really nicely to how you understood in the hearing. I think you were saying that last time, because this kind of halacha that we custom would seem to imply in the case of the hidden pig, you could simply just push the straw out of the way here and there till you could see the pig and then take it out.
Yes, so that's exactly what I was saying. The Mishnah Berurah is really quoting a Taz, and the Taz says this Chiddush. He says that you can sweep the egoism and the klippos egoism and the atzomas and things like that off the table, and he says that's called Titul and HaTsad because I'm not directly handling them. Number one, and number two, it doesn't fall foul of the svara of the Rishonim and Membeis because my intention is not for the sake of the Muktza, my intention is for the sake of the table. Asks the Shulchan Aruch Harav on that. True, but I'm directly engaging with the Muktza. And therefore, Titul and HaTsad, it's Yod Arichrichter, it's just a long hand. Titul and HaTsad shouldn't help. And if you want to suggest that that's what our Gemara says, also known as you want to read the Gemara like the Miri, it doesn't fit the language of the Gemara because the Gemara says V'hem Menaris Me'alei, and it doesn't say you're sweeping them away. So that's correct. So I think my reading in the Meiri, even though they don't cite the Meiri, is how the Taz is passing, how the Mishnah Berurah is passing out the Taz.
So potentially, according to this, the Mishnah Berurah would be passing against the one
correct, yeah, in that sense. We don't have a right that the Rambam's allow it. It's just simply not how the Rambam explains the story in the Gemara. I'm playing an ahistorical reading of the Gemara. So, in other words, the Taz and the Mishnah Berurah are evidenced by how the Meiri would read the Gemara. Yeah.
I think,
even though they don't cite the Meiri. Yeah.
The Rambam wouldn't have to be isolated. It just simply be that the Rambam imagines that
Correct.
when you push the thing in, you're not doing anything.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, and maybe because of the language of the Gemara and so on. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, but that's exactly what I was coming to say. That the halacha l'maisa of being able to sweep away with a little brush shells and atzomas off a table is chiddush number one. It doesn't fall foul of the Rishonim. I'm doing it for the sake of non-Muktza, not for the sake of Muktza. And chiddush number two is even though I'm directly engaging with the Muktza through another means, nonetheless that's not a problem. Yeah. Okay. So that's that's the extent of what I have to say on the Ritva, that part of the Ritva and the Run. What I now want to do is read the second part of the Ritva and the Run. Well, let's do Tosafos. So Tosafos Paga HaTsad v'chula. So Tosafos is bothered by why is it not a bossis? Because sitting on top of the chaburah or the Paga is ash, is coal or teven, and therefore the Paga or the chaburah are bossis dava asa. So Tosafos answers that in a case where you put something Muktza on top of a non-Muktza item with intention to remove the Muktza item on Shabbat, the Muktza off it on Shabbat in a mutter way, then it doesn't become a bossis. The whole lomdus of bossis is that the book on which I put my money becomes bottle, subservient to the money, to the Muktza, because I'm making the book into a tray for Shabbos and clearly removing it. Over here, if on the other hand, if my intention is that money should be taken off Shabbos in some way or other, then the lomdos of bosses doesn't make sense, and therefore it doesn't become a bosses. And therefore, since over here my intention is to remove the Paga or the chaburah on Shabbos in a way because of Titul and HaTsad, therefore it wouldn't become a bosses. That's Tosfos's answer of the question. And we touched on this, we didn't go into this before, and we're not going to go into it too much now, but this is the principle that Tosfos says in Kuf Mem base on base again, and also it's this principle that we saw when we learned earlier, Sukkah in Daf Mem Gimel, wherever it was, where we spoke about people dying on Shabbos and Shochach and all these svaras. We saw similar svaras around that something only becomes a bosses if it's deliberately placed there, not where it's Shochach, and perhaps not where it becomes Muktza on Shabbos, where he dies on Shabbos, and also perhaps not where you have intentionality to remove it. Those are regular Sukkah in bosses. That's how Tosfos answers the question. Oh, so it's because of the Ramah. Yeah, okay. So there's two other answers to this question, which I just briefly want to summarize. The first alternative answer to this question is in the Run and the Ritva, and they both say that you've got your facts wrong over here. Your lomdos is wrong. A very beautiful answer conceptually. They both say that the lomdos of bosses is that I'm making the book, let's say, on which the money is sitting, inferior to the money. I'm using the book as a means to provide space for the money. That's the lomdos of bosses, that the money is placed on the book. Over here, the Teven and the Gecholim are not there. They're not put on top of the fruit of the chaburah. The fruit and the chaburah are not, the Paga and the chaburah are not there to serve as a bosses for the Teven and the Gecholim. On the contrary, the Gecholim and the Teven are there to serve the chaburah and the Paga. The Teven is there to ripen the fruit, and the Gecholis is there to finish baking the loaf, crisping the loaf, or whatever it is. So in the whole lomdos of bosses doesn't make sense in this case. The lomdos of bosses is that the object underneath is there serving the object which is placed on top of it as a placeholder. Over here, the chaburah and the Paga are not placeholders for the Teven and the Gecholis. On the contrary, they are there to serve it, and it just happens to be underneath it, and therefore the lomdos of bosses doesn't make sense. That's the Rishonim's answer to the question. So that's the second answer to the question. And it seems such a good answer, it's difficult to know what to make of Tosfos. It seems to knock out blow, right? So in the lomdos, it's a very convincing answer. Tosfos seems to have held that bosses make sense even in that case there. Because the fact is, the Gecholis and the Teven is sitting, the Gecholim and the Teven are sitting on top of it, and then that's enough to make it bosses. So it seems to have sort of, in a sense, applied the rule of bosses a little more mathematically. Is it sitting on top? Yeah. Is it supporting? Yeah. That's the chiddush of bosses. But the Rishonim are arguing that if you think about the lomdos of it, it's not just a it's not just an algorithm rule that you can blindly apply. There's a logic to it, a svara behind it, which is that it's there subservient to it, serving it, and therefore it doesn't make sense. That's the second answer to the question.
According to the second, how do they understand why the stone
As a lid,
if the stone is serving the barrel,
yes.
then according to this answer, it couldn't have simply become boxes.
Correct.
But it does. The Gemara there says, "Lo shana lo shana."
In a case where you want it to, where you don't want it to serve, where you want it to do something.
Either it's doing something. I mean, so what?
As far as I remember, the Rishonim say that the case where the chovis becomes bosses is a case where you want the chovis to, you want the Evan just to be there as a place to store the Evan. And Enochanami, if you would have a Evan which is there to protect the chovis, then the same lomdos would apply. That's as far as I remember. No, I suspect you're right. They would learn shecheach is the same case, but you forgot it there. You weren't maniach it there. That's what that's to say. I'm speaking. I'm a little rusty here, so I provisionally, subject to change when I relook after the Rishonim again. I think they're learning. They're learning that both shecheach and maniach are cases where you want the stone, and that's why it's told on shecheach and maniach. But if you had a case where the stone was there to protect the chavis, then even with miniach it wouldn't be a basis. The same with the same chiddush again. That's as far as I remember. But I need to double check. Did you look at the Rishonim there, or?
No, I was only just
No,
trying to
fine.
understand.
Yeah. Okay. As far as I remember, that's what comes out. But I'm not 100%. Okay. Either way, that's a second answer to the question. A third answer to the question, which is why I gave out the Ramah to have a look at, is the Ramah seems to make a new principle of ein bosses b'oichlim, that an oichel can't become a bosses. So there's two ways of learning the Ramah. The low road is, the Magen Avraham takes this route, is that the Ramah doesn't really mean a new principle. He just means another iteration of the Ritva and the run. He simply means to say such a case where you're doing things to cook or ripen oichlim isn't a boss's case, and he doesn't mean a new principle. The alternative reading in the Ramah is to take the Ramah at face value. He's saying a new chiddush that oichel can't become bosses, and as oichel is too important and too independent an entity to become a bosses. A keli, which is there to serve things, so I can make it I can make my book as a tray to store money on. So the concept of bosses makes sense. But an oichel, what makes an oichel not Muktza isn't because it's there to serve things or to be used for things. What makes an oichel not Muktza is because it's an oichel, it's food. And therefore the londas of bosses doesn't make sense with an oichel. A keli can become an oichel, a bosses. Foods can't become a bosses because it has an integral chashivas that makes it independent of things which happen to be placed on top of it. There is a kolboy and various other rishonim that say like this. I didn't print this because it's two-way off sugya. There is a meiri, again not cited by anyone until modern times, who says this similar chiddush to this Ramah, and there is a kolboy who also says similar language to the Ramah, but doesn't mean the high roads. He means the low roads. He's just saying the same as far as the Rishonim, even though he's using that language. It remains unresolved. So basically, the Ramah says a new principle that the oichel can't become a bosses. Either it's simply by that he means oichel where you're doing it for the sake of the oichel, it doesn't become a bosses, in which case it means the same as Rishonim, and that's how the Magen Avraham learns pshat in the Ramah, the Vilna Gaon learns pshat in the Ramah. That's how some of the Rishonim who say similar language seem to mean. And the alternative is the Ramah genuinely means a new principle. And that's how there's a meiri later on that seems to also say a similar thing, and that's how various other poskim, Sameach and others understand the Ramah. So it remains a little bit of an unclear. Ramah, we'll finish with that, and Zmiat Hashem on Sunday we'll look at Tosis and Masechet Shabbat, and then we'll move on to the next sugya.
Thank you.
Go, Josh. Thank you.